The desert sun hit Fort Ellison like a hammer, flattening sound and color into a haze of gold and heat. The firing line stretched across the sand, the air shimmering above the targets in the distance. Staff Sergeant Cole Evans barked orders over the rattle of rifle fire, his voice confident, his grin wide as the recruits scrambled to keep up. He moved with the swagger of someone who owned the range, a man whose authority grew louder the hotter the day became, the smell of gunpowder mixed with dust and sweat, hanging thick in the dry air. Behind the firing line, a woman stood quietly, still as stone. Master Sergeant Evelyn Reed held a digital notepad against her forearm, her uniform crisp, her face unreadable beneath the brim of her patrol cap. Evans noticed her and smirked. He called out in a friendly, mocking tone, suggesting that maybe the Pentagon sent someone to make sure the soldiers remembered which end of the rifle was dangerous. The recruits laughed, eager to mirror his confidence. She said nothing. Her eyes moved across the line, calm and deliberate, taking in every movement like she was cataloging the wind itself. High above, in the shade of the observation tower, Colonel Bishop watched through binoculars. He saw something the others didn't. The quiet poise of a professional who belonged exactly where she stood. The wind picked up, sweeping grit across the range, carrying the smell of hot metal and oil. The laughter faded into the sound of the rifles. The air changed, heavy and expectant, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. The sun sat high over Range 7, bright enough to bleach color from the world. The line of recruits lay prone on the firing mats, rifles aimed downrange, every movement precise but anxious. Staff Sergeant Cole Evans walked behind them, boots crunching against gravel, voice carrying across the desert like it owned the air. He told them that marksmanship was not theory, but truth measured in fractions of an inch. He spoke about precision, discipline, and legacy. And yet every word came out as a performance, polished and self-serving. He stopped near the range sign, tapping it with the butt of his glove. The board was old, weathered, and cracked by heat, but the black lettering still stood out. Gauntlet record, GSGT-M. Thorn, 10 years untouched. Evans told the story of Thorn like it was scripture. 5 targets, increasing distance, shifting winds. Only one shooter had ever landed 5 perfect hits, and that man had been his idol. Evans lifted his chin toward his audience, voice tightening with pride, as he said, no one had come close since. The recruits stared with admiration, soaking up his confidence, mistaking volume for mastery. He turned slightly, catching sight of Master Sergeant Evelyn Reed again, still silent, still standing. His grin sharpened as he raised his voice, calling her out with false charm. He joked that maybe the auditors from Tradoc wanted to understand what real shooters looked like. Laughter rippled through the line. Nervous, but eager to please. Reed gave no sign that she even heard him. Her focus stayed steady, her stillness unbroken, as if she had tuned him out entirely. The contrast hung in the heat, heavy and uncomfortable. From the tower above, Colonel David Bishop lowered his binoculars for a moment, then brought them back up. Through the shimmer of rising heat, he watched the way Reed shifted her stance slightly, balancing her weight like someone trained to move and shoot without thought. Her calm breathing contrasted sharply with Evans's theatrical swagger. Bishop's expression hardened. He saw what no one else saw yet. The loud man was teaching, but the quiet one was about to give the real lesson. The wind shifted over Range 7, carrying dust and the smell of spent brass. Staff Sergeant Cole Evans clapped his hands together, his grin wide and performative. He told the recruits that since their guest seemed so curious, maybe she should try a few rounds herself. His tone was polite on the surface, but dipped with sarcasm. The recruits laughed again, though the sound felt thinner now. Uncertain, Master Sergeant Evelyn Reed looked up from her notepad and gave a single nod. No expression, No hesitation. The laughter stopped. Evans spread his arms, inviting her forward, as if hosting a show. He told everyone that it was a perfect day to prove why legends stay legends. His voice echoing against the berms. The wind gusted harder, swirling sand around the line. Targets wavered through the heat mirage. Reed stepped onto the gravel, her boots steady, her movements unhurried. She walked past the rows of rifles, each one modern and sleek, their optics gleaming in the sun. She did not slow until she reached the last case. A dusty container tucked aside like an afterthought. She opened it quietly. Inside lay the M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, its matte finish scarred from long service. Evans frowned. The recruits looked at one another. Reed lifted the rifle from the case with the kind of ease that only comes from familiarity. She checked the chamber, tested the bolt, then attached the bipod with smooth precision. Every motion was deliberate, stripped of waste. She opened a small ammo box, slid in 5 rounds of Propus, 300 Winchester Magnum, and locked the magazine in place. The metallic click cut through the wind. The recruits fell silent, watching. The only sound left was the rattle of loose gravel beneath her boots and the wind rolling across the range. Reed knelt and stretched out prone on a worn shooting mat, aligning her body perfectly behind the rifle. She adjusted the stock, nestled her cheek against it, and began scanning the mirage for wind direction. Her breathing slowed, even from a distance. Her stillness drew the eye. Evans folded his arms, trying to look confident, but a flicker of unease crossed his face. The colonel watched from above, eyes fixed on her through the binoculars. The desert fell quiet. The heat shimmered. The air felt heavy with anticipation, as if everything on Range 7 had gone still. Waiting for the sound of her first shot, the desert was quiet now, except for the rasp of the wind and the soft scrape of sand against metal. Master Sergeant Evelyn Reed stayed motionless behind the rifle, her cheek resting against the stock, her breathing slow and controlled. Staff Sergeant Evans stood nearby, arms crossed, a smirk half-formed on his face. The recruits waited behind him, too nervous to speak, caught between doubt and fascination. Colonel Bishop watched from the tower above, his binoculars steady. The heat shimmered across the 800-yard line. Reed adjusted her scope, turning the elevation knob with tiny, precise movements. She studied the mirage rising off the ground, reading the invisible currents that twisted through the air. Her finger settled on the trigger, and for a heartbeat, everything stopped. The rifle cracked. The sound rolled across the desert, sharp and clean. A metallic ping echoed back a second later. Center mass. Evans exhaled, masking his surprise with a laugh, calling it a lucky shot. The recruits didn't join him. They stared at the target, the perfect hole glinting in the sunlight. Reed cycled the bolt, ejecting the spent casing with a flick of her wrist. The brass hit the mat beside her and rolled in a small circle. She didn't look up. She adjusted her windage a single click, shifted her body slightly, and aimed again. The second target sat at 1 yards, half hidden behind a piece of simulated cover. She waited, watching the flutter of the wind flag, then squeezed. Another crack, another echo. The metal plate spun on its post. A low murmur rippled through the recruits. It was no accident. They could feel it now. The third target waited at 1 yards. The most difficult of all, a hostage simulation, 2 silhouettes layered in front of each other. The air was unsteady, the wind unpredictable, but Reed stayed calm. She angled the rifle slightly, accounting for spin drift and the faint Coriolis pull that curved every bullet just a fraction to the right. Her chest rose and fell once she fired. The sound was sharper this time, harder. There was a pause so long it felt like the whole range forgot to breathe. Then, a dull thack. The rear silhouette dropped, The hostage remained untouched. The silence that followed was absolute. Evan swallowed. His smirk was gone. The recruits were frozen, their eyes fixed on Reed as she adjusted again. The fourth target stood at 1.2 yards. The wind grew wild, pushing and pulling the flags in opposite directions. Reed waited, her finger resting gently on the trigger guard, not fighting the elements, but feeling their rhythm. Then, in a brief lull, she fired. The rifle bucked once, and after a long heartbeat, a faint ring drifted back. Even the wind seemed to hesitate before starting again. The fifth and final target shimmered through the heat at 1.2 yards. No one spoke. Reed exhaled slowly, her pulse steady and quiet. The world shrank to the narrow circle of her scope. She timed the shot with her breathing, each inhale shorter than the last. When she fired, it felt like the sound cracked the air itself. The desert held still, waiting. Then the faintest ping came back. Light, but unmistakable. 5 for 5. Reed lifted her head and pulled the bolt open, ejecting the last casing. The 5 brass shells lay in the sand beside her like small pieces of gold. She didn't smile. She just cleared the weapon and set it aside. Evan stood rigid, his mouth half open, his words gone. The recruits stared at the targets as if they were seeing ghosts. Up in the tower, Colonel Bishop lowered his binoculars, his face unreadable. The air itself felt different now, as if the desert had seen something sacred. A legend had just been born. The echo of the final shot drifted away into the desert until only the wind remained. The recruits stood frozen, their rifles forgotten, eyes fixed on the targets in the distance. Staff Sergeant Evans looked pale. The color drained from his face. No one spoke. Even the air felt heavy, as if it refused to move after what it had just witnessed. Colonel David Bishop stepped down from the observation tower, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. Every head turned as he made his way toward the firing line. Reed didn't look up. She was still kneeling beside the M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, calmly running a cleaning rod through the barrel, her movements steady and practiced. The recruits slowly came to attention, their posture stiff with confusion and awe. The colonel stopped a few feet behind her and studied her in silence. Then he spoke, his voice quiet, carrying a weight that cut through the still air. He said the rifle's name was Eleanor. It had once belonged to Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thorne, the man who set the range record 10 years earlier. He remembered Thorne telling him that Eleanor only shot true for someone who understood her completely. The colonel's tone shifted as he straightened up. He called to his young lieutenant, instructing him to bring Master Sergeant Reed's full personnel file. The lieutenant sprinted off, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. When he returned, his hands trembled as he passed the tablet over. The colonel scrolled for a moment, his expression unreadable, then began to read aloud. Her listed assignment was what everyone assumed: training and doctrine command liaison, observer, auditor. But below that was a designation few had ever seen: United States Army Special Operations Command, Special Activities Division. He paused and looked at Evans. That division, he said, does not officially exist. The recruits exchanged uncertain glances. The colonel continued. Reed had been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, a Silver Star, and 5 Bronze Stars for valor. The details were classified, but one citation described her holding position under fire in the Hindu Kush, neutralizing a high-value target while saving her team. The colonel looked up, his voice firm now. He said she was not only qualified as a sniper instructor, but had written the classified annex to the long-range marksmanship manual that every instructor in the room had studied. The same techniques Evans had spent years teaching came from her hand. Evans's breath hitched. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. The recruits stood motionless, the truth sinking in. Everything they thought they knew about hierarchy and expertise had just been rewritten. The colonel lowered the tablet and stepped forward. He raised his right hand slowly and gave her a perfect, formal salute. The gesture cut through the tension like a knife. Reed paused, then stood, returning the salute with quiet precision before bending down to secure the rifle in its case. No one dared to move. The sun glared against the sand, reflecting off the brass casing scattered at her feet. Colonel Bishop turned to the recruits and then to Evans, his eyes hard but proud. He said nothing else. The moment spoke for itself. On that scorching stretch of desert, under a cloudless sky, the range had become something sacred. The recruits knew they had witnessed the birth of a legend, and in the silence that followed, even the wind seemed to bow in respect. That evening, Fort Ellison felt different. The sun had set behind the mountains, leaving the range bathed in a deep orange glow, but the air still carried the echoes of what had happened. Word of Master Sergeant Evelyn Reed's 5 perfect shots spread through the barracks before lights out. Recruits whispered about the woman who had shattered a decade-old record with an old M2010 rifle called Eleanor. Someone pulled up the range logs and confirmed that the weapon had been checked out under her name. Another claimed he saw the colonel salute her before midnight. An anonymous post appeared on an unofficial military forum describing every detail. Within hours, comments flooded in, some doubting, others swearing they were there. By morning, no one was laughing. Across the base, the story became something more than rumor. Soldiers spoke about it in quiet tones. The way people talk about things that matter. Instructors who had once rolled their eyes at observers fell silent. A few of them went out to Range 7 early, just to see the targets for themselves. The holes in the steel plates were neat, perfect, undeniable. It was proof that couldn't be argued with. The legend of the ghost of Range 7 began not from exaggeration but from truth, and that made it stronger. In the instructor's lounge, Staff Sergeant Cole Evans sat alone at the back table. His coffee had gone cold, untouched for an hour. The laughter and noise that used to fill the room were gone. He kept replaying every word he'd said, every smirk, every glance at the recruits when he thought he was teaching them confidence. Now it only felt hollow. His peers didn't speak to him, not out of resentment, but out of shared understanding. They all saw their own pride reflected in his mistake. The range had humbled them all in its own quiet way. By the end of the week, a work detail arrived at Range 7. They carried a small brass plaque and mounted it to the concrete block near the final firing position. Colonel Bishop himself watched as it was secured. The inscription read, "The Thorn Reed Line. Competence is the only rank that matters." The recruits began stopping to read it before every qualification, their fingers brushing the cool metal for luck. Over time, it became a ritual, a silent reminder of what had happened there. The story of Range 7 was no longer just gossip. It had become a creed, a lesson carved into the heart of Fort Ellison. The next morning, the desert light came soft and pale over Range 7. The sand looked smooth again, the chaos of yesterday already swallowed by the wind. Staff Sergeant Cole Evans walked toward the firing line, his boots crunching quietly against the gravel. The base was still waking up, the distant sound of cadence calls drifting from somewhere far off. He carried no rifle this time, only the weight of his own thoughts. The humiliation of the day before had settled deep in his chest, heavy but strangely clarifying. He saw her before she saw him. Master Sergeant Evelyn Reed was lying prone beside a shooting mat, adjusting the optic on a recruit's M110A1 rifle. Her motions were slow and steady, the kind of focus that made time irrelevant. There was no hint of triumph in her face, no trace of what she had done. To her, this was just another morning, another task to be done well. Evans hesitated a few yards away, fighting the urge to turn back. His throat felt dry, his voice small. Finally, he stepped forward until his shadow touched her boots. It spoke quietly, his words halting at first. He told her he was sorry for the arrogance, for the disrespect, for not seeing her for who she was. Sorry for teaching recruits the wrong kind of confidence." She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she looked up at him, her gaze steady, but not cold. She told him to focus on the fundamentals. "Ego," she said, "is a phantom sight. It makes you miss the real target." Then she turned back to her work, adjusting the rifle's windage without another word. Evan stood there for a long time. Watching her, the wind moved softly across the range. Carrying the smell of oil and sand, her words sank in slowly. Not as a reprimand, but as a truth. He should have known all along. Humility was not weakness. It was control. The same kind of quiet precision she had shown with every shot. He breathed in the desert air, the sting of pride fading like gun smoke after a clean hit. For the first time in years, he felt like a student again. A year had passed since the wind carried the sound of 5 perfect shots across Range 7. The desert looked the same, but something in the air felt different. Almost sacred. A new class of sniper recruits stood in a straight line along the firing mats, their faces a mix of nerves and determination. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows across the sand. Sergeant First Class Cole Evans stood before them, calm and composed, his voice steady but quieter than it once was. He pointed toward the small brass plaque fixed to the concrete at the end of the line. The words engraved there caught the morning light. The Thorn Reed line. Competence is the only rank that matters. He told them the story that the plaque didn't, about the woman who came to the range as an observer and left as a legend. He described how she stood against the wind, calm and unshaken, and hit 5 impossible targets without a single word. He admitted he had mocked her, doubted her, and learned what true mastery looked like only when it was too late to hide his shame. His voice held no pride, only reverence. The recruits listened in silence, the desert wind whispering softly through the brush. When he finished, he told them that what mattered most on this range wasn't rank, reputation, or noise. It was discipline. It was respect for the craft and for the people who mastered it quietly, thousands of miles away, in a high mountain range. Master Sergeant Evelyn Reed lay prone on rocky ground beside a young Allied sniper. The rifle in front of her was the same one that had made her a legend. Eleanor, still marked by time and use. The younger sniper adjusted her scope nervously. Reed's voice was calm, and even as she guided her through wind calls and breathing control, the shot rang out, sharp and perfect, striking steel in the valley below. The young woman smiled. Reed only nodded, the faintest trace of satisfaction in her eyes. She had passed on what mattered. Back at Fort Ellison, the plaque at Range 7 had already begun to lose its shine. Sand had softened its edges, but the words remained. The story of that day had moved beyond the barracks. It had become something deeper, a quiet code carried by every shooter who learned under its shadow. Evelyn Reed's name might fade, her medals might tarnish, but the standard she set would not. It lived in every steady breath and every clean trigger pull that came after. Her legacy was not written in brass or stone. It was written in the silence that follows a perfect shot. The brass plaque on Range 7 caught the morning light, its once bright surface dulled by wind and sand. The words engraved into it were softened but still clear. The Thorn Reed line. Competence is the only rank that matters. Around it, the desert stretched silent and wide, the air still carrying the faint scent of oil and dust. Every class that passed through the range paused before it, some out of habit, some out of respect, all knowing they were standing where a lesson had been written in steel and silence. Respect, the narrator reflects, is not something pinned to a chest or shouted across a firing line. It is something proven between heartbeats, in the quiet after the shot, in the steadiness of those who act without the need to be seen. Master Sergeant Evelyn Reed never asked for recognition. Her name became legend not because she sought it, but because her actions demanded it. Her strength was quiet, her precision absolute. her ego non-existent. The sun climbed higher, the light glinting faintly off the plaque as a breeze moved through the range. Respect is not given by rank. It is earned through action. Power is not declared. It is demonstrated, and somewhere in that desert silence, the world still remembers the echo of 5 perfect shots.